My husband and his mistress were on a recorded call discussing how they'd stripped me of everything in our divorce. "She'll be left with nothing but debt," he laughed. "We'll take the house, the business, everything she built." They thought I was oblivious, powerless, just a naive wife who would crumble when served papers. But they never anticipated what I had already set in motion, or how their own recorded words would be their downfall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I once believed in the sanctity of marriage. Not the fairy tale version where everything is perfect, but the real kind, built on trust, mutual respect, and the promise that no matter what life threw at us, we'd face it together. When I married Lionel Thompson 8 years ago, I thought I had found that partnership. He was charismatic, ambitious, and had this natural ability to make everyone in a room feel special, especially me. Our wedding was intimate but beautiful. We exchanged vows at sunset on the beach where we'd had our first date, surrounded by only our closest friends and family. I can still remember the salt in the air, the warmth of his hands holding mine, and the sincerity in his eyes as he promised to love me forever. Back then, I never questioned the authenticity of his words or the depth of his commitment. I believed him completely. We built a life that, from the outside, seemed picture-perfect. A stunning home in the suburbs of Seattle that I had poured my heart into renovating. A marketing consultancy that had grown from my small freelance business into a respected firm with major clients across the Pacific Northwest. 2 cars in the garage, vacations in Europe, and the kind of comfortable lifestyle that made our friends envious. But as any adult knows, appearances can be deceiving. The most convincing lies are often those told by the people closest to us, the ones we never think to question. And the deepest betrayals? They don't come from enemies or strangers. They come from the people who know exactly where to plant the knife. Looking back, I can identify the small shifts, the subtle changes that should have alerted me that something was wrong. The late nights at the office that became more frequent, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way Lionel's phone would always be face down when he set it on the counter, or how he'd step out of the room to take certain calls. But love, especially the kind built over years, creates a particular kind of blindness. We see what we want. To see, we believe what we need to believe, and we explain away the inconsistencies because the alternative is too painful to consider. I was guilty of this selective vision. When Lionel's affection cooled, I told myself he was stressed about work. When he became distant and distracted during our conversations, I convinced myself it was because he had a lot on his mind. When the intimacy between us waned, I blamed myself for not being more attentive, more exciting, more everything. That's the insidious nature of gaslighting. It makes you question your own reality. It turns you into an unreliable narrator of your own life. And Lionel was a master at it. "You're overreacting," he'd say when I'd ask about the perfume I smelled on his collar. "You're imagining things," he'd insist when I mentioned how he'd deleted text messages before handing me his phone. "You've always been too sensitive," he'd sigh when I expressed concern that we were growing apart, and I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative, that the man I had built my life with was systematically lying to me, was unthinkable. But truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And mine came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in April, the kind of dreary Seattle day where the rain seems to seep into your bones. I was in my home office, finalizing a pitch for a potential new client. This account could potentially double our agency's revenue, and I'd been working on the presentation for weeks. Lionel had left that morning for what he claimed was a 3-day business conference in Portland. Nothing unusual there. He traveled frequently for his role as development director for a commercial real estate firm. My desk phone rang. Not my cell, but the landline we kept for business purposes. I picked up, expecting it to be the potential client with last-minute questions. Thompson residence, I answered, my voice professional yet warm. There was no response on the other end, just the faint sound of voices in the background. I was about to hang up, assuming it was a wrong number, when I heard it. Lionel's distinctive laugh. The warm, throaty chuckle that had once made my heart skip, but now sent a chill down my spine. "She has no idea," he was saying, his voice slightly distant but unmistakable. Absolutely clueless. I should have hung up. Some part of me knew that whatever I was about to hear would change everything. But I couldn't. I was frozen, the receiver pressed against my ear, my breath shallow as I listened to my husband speaking about me to someone else. "The divorce papers are being finalized this week," Lionel continued. "My lawyer says with the documentation we've prepared, we can push for the dissolution of the business as a marital asset." A female voice responded, too low for me to make out the words clearly, but the tone was conspiratorial, intimate. "Exactly," Lionel replied to whatever she had said. "She put everything in both our names when we got married. Trusting to a fault, that's our Caroline." Our Caroline. My name in... His mouth suddenly felt wrong, tainted. "The house, the business, the investment accounts. We'll take it all," he continued, confidence evident in every syllable. "She'll be left with nothing but debt. That's what happens when you're naive enough to believe in happily ever after." The woman laughed, and this time I could hear her more clearly. "And then we'll finally be together officially. No more sneaking around." "Just a few more weeks of playing the devoted husband," Lionel agreed. "Then freedom, and everything she built." I don't remember setting the phone down. I don't remember the tears that must have fallen, or the way my body must have collapsed into my office chair. All I remember is the ringing in my ears and the sudden, crystal-clear realization that my entire marriage had been a lie. Lionel wasn't at a business conference in Portland. He was somewhere with another woman, his mistress, planning how they would strip me of everything I had worked for, everything I had built. They were plotting the systematic destruction of my life while laughing about my trusting nature, my naivete. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The shock and pain didn't disappear. They were still there, razor-sharp and bleeding. But alongside them grew something new, a cold, clear determination. This would not be the end of my story. This would not be how Caroline Thompson was written, out of her own life. What Lionel and his mistress didn't realize was that they had made a critical error. The business line they were speaking on? It automatically recorded all calls, a feature I had installed years ago to ensure we never missed important client details. Their entire conversation, every damning word, every cruel laugh, every detail of their scheme, was now preserved in digital clarity. And as I sat there, my world collapsing around me, I already knew one thing with absolute certainty. This recording would be their undoing. I didn't immediately confront Lionel. That's what he would have expected. An emotional outburst, tears, accusations. The kind of reaction that would let him paint me as unstable, irrational, the hysterical soon-to-be ex-wife who couldn't accept reality. Instead, I did something that would prove far more destructive to his carefully laid plans. I began to think strategically. The recording wasn't just evidence of his infidelity. That alone wouldn't have protected what was mine. No, it was proof of something far more damaging. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Lionel and his mistress had explicitly discussed hiding assets, manipulating financial records, and deliberately deceiving both me and the court system. They had unknowingly confessed to planning actions that were not just morally reprehensible, but legally actionable. That night, I sat alone in our home office, the same space where hours earlier my world had shattered. The house was quiet. Too quiet, as I copied the recording to multiple secure locations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I made backups of backups, ensuring that this crucial piece of evidence couldn't be lost or destroyed. Then I began to research, methodically and thoroughly, preparing myself for the battle ahead. What Lionel failed to understand about me, what he had always underestimated, was my capacity for adaptation. He saw me as vulnerable because I had loved him completely, because I had trusted without reservation. But the same determination that had built our business from nothing, the same resilience that had carried me through losing both parents before I turned 30, now focused on a single purpose, ensuring that his betrayal would not define my future. As I listened to the recording again, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, raw and throbbing, but alongside it grew something colder, more calculated. I heard Lionel's laughter as he discussed leaving me with nothing but debt, heard the contempt in his voice when he called me naive enough to believe in happily ever after. And instead of breaking me, it hardened me. "You think you know me?" I whispered to his voice on the recording. "You think because I loved you, I'm weak. That's your first mistake." By morning, I had outlined the framework of a plan. Not a hasty, emotional reaction, but a precise, methodical strategy that would unfold over weeks. Lionel believed he held all the cards, the business connections, the financial knowledge, the element of surprise. He thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but he had never really seen me, not the real me. Not the woman who had negotiated her first six-figure contract at 29, who had outmaneuvered corporate competitors with 10 times my resources, who had built something from nothing through sheer force of will. Now, that same strategic mind was focused entirely on one objective: making sure Lionel and his mistress lost everything they thought they were about to gain. I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror that morning, eyes clear, despite the sleepless night, jaw set with determination. I hardly recognized myself, but perhaps that was appropriate. The woman Lionel married, trusting, accommodating, eager to please, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal. "They won't see me coming," I told my reflection. "And by the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late." I showered and dressed with particular care that morning, selecting a sleek black dress that projected confidence and control. I applied makeup to conceal the evidence of my sleepless night, swept my hair into a polished updo, and fastened the diamond earrings Lionel had given me for our 5th anniversary, a reminder of everything he was trying to take from me. As I prepared to leave for the office, I received a text from Lionel. "Conference running long. Won't be home until late tomorrow. Don't wait up." Another lie. Another day he was spending with her, planning my downfall while I was supposed to be obliviously managing our business, generating the wealth he intended to claim. I typed a response worthy of the old Caroline. "Miss you. Be safe driving home." Then I picked up my keys, straightened my shoulders, and walked out the door. On the surface, nothing had changed. I would go to my office, meet with clients, lead my team. I would maintain the appearance of a woman whose biggest concern was landing the Henderson account, not the fact that her marriage and financial security were being systematically dismantled behind her back. But beneath this carefully maintained facade, everything had changed. Each meeting, each phone call, each email would now serve a dual purpose. I wasn't just running my business. I was gathering ammunition, building alliances, securing my position. Every interaction was an opportunity to strengthen my case and weaken Lionel's. My first stop wasn't the office, though. It was the office of Morgan Reynolds, the most formidable divorce attorney in Seattle. I had researched her extensively overnight. Her reputation for ruthlessness was legendary, particularly in cases involving business assets and financial deception. Her retainer fee was exorbitant, but she was worth every penny for one critical, Reason. Once she represented me, she couldn't represent Lionel. And I knew from his browsing history, yes, I had checked, that she was at the top of his list of potential attorneys. They think I'm going to crumble, I said to myself as I pulled into the parking garage beside Morgan's downtown office building. They have no idea what's coming. The satisfaction I felt wasn't happiness. Nothing about this situation would ever bring joy. But there was a grim sense of purpose in knowing that Lionel's carefully constructed plan was already beginning to unravel, thread by thread, and he didn't even know it yet. The man who thought he knew me completely, who had calculated my every reaction, was about to discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated me, and that would be just the beginning of his education. I wasn't always Caroline Thompson, successful business owner and betrayed wife. Before Lionel, before the marketing firm and the beautiful house, I was simply Caroline Miller, a girl from a middle-class neighborhood in Tacoma who had big dreams and the work ethic to match them. My father was a high school English teacher who believed that books could change lives, and my mother ran a small floral shop that barely broke even but filled our home with the scent of fresh flowers. They weren't wealthy, but they gave me something far more valuable than money. They taught me that integrity was non-negotiable, and that with enough determination, I could build whatever life I envisioned. I worked my way through college, graduated with honors, and landed an entry-level position at a Seattle marketing agency. While my peers spent evenings at happy hours, I was taking additional courses, learning new software, building a portfolio of freelance work. By 25, I started my own small consultancy. By 27, I had 3 employees and a growing list of clients. It was at a networking event that I first met Lionel. He was 32 to my 28, already established in commercial real estate development, confident in a way that drew people to him naturally. When he focused his attention on me, it felt like being bathed in sunlight after a long winter. He was interested, genuinely interested, I thought, in my business, my ambitions, my perspective on everything from marketing trends to urban development. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, he had proposed. I remember calling my mother the night he gave me the ring, my voice shaking with excitement as I described how he had recreated our first date, how he had gotten down on one knee as the sun set over Elliott Bay. He makes me feel like I can accomplish anything, I told her. Like together, we're unstoppable. My mother's response was measured, cautious in a way that slightly dampened my euphoria. Just make sure he loves you for who you are, Caroline, not for what you can do for him. At the time, I dismissed her concern as the natural wariness of a parent. Now, 7 years later, her words echoed in my mind with painful clarity. She had seen something in Lionel that I, blinded by love and ambition, had missed entirely. The early years of our marriage seemed to validate my choice. We were partners in the truest sense, or so I believed. Lionel supported my growing business, introduced me to potential clients from his network, celebrated every milestone as if it were his own accomplishment. When I suggested combining our financial lives completely, joint accounts, shared investments, mutual ownership of assets, he agreed without hesitation. "What's mine is yours," he said with that smile that still made my heart race. "We're building a life together," and build we did. Under our joint management, my consultancy expanded from local businesses to national brands. We purchased our dream home in Madison Park, a gorgeous craftsman with views of Lake Washington that needed significant renovation. I threw myself into the project, transforming it room by room into a showcase of both comfort and style. We hosted dinner parties where Lionel charmed our guests, while I ensured every detail was perfect. We appeared in the local business journal as Seattle's power couple to watch. Looking back, I can see how strategically Lionel positioned himself within my life and business. He never sought formal employment at my company. That would have been too obvious, too easily defined in divorce proceedings. Instead, he operated in the gray areas, consulting on major decisions, advising on financial matters, connecting me with his network. His contributions were real but deliberately ambiguous, impossible to quantify yet undeniably valuable. "I'm your biggest advocate," he would say, raising a glass to my success at company events. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative, that he was carefully establishing a claim to everything I built, was unthinkable. What I didn't recognize then was how he subtly recategorized my achievements as our achievements, my business as our business, my success as our success. In public, he positioned himself as the strategic mind behind Caroline Miller Consulting. In private conversations with our friends and associates, he implied that his business acumen had been the catalyst for the company's growth. "Caroline has the creative vision," he would say, arm draped casually around my shoulders. "I help with the business side. We make a perfect team." And I would smile, grateful for his support, never correcting the implication that I couldn't have built the company without him. Why would I? He was my husband, my partner. His success was my success. My success was his success. That's what marriage meant to me. My parents watched this dynamic develop with increasing concern. During their last visit before my father's sudden heart attack, he pulled me aside while Lionel was entertaining my mother in the garden. "Caroline," he said, his voice low and serious, "I want you to remember something. You built your business before you met Lionel. You had the vision, the talent, the drive. Don't let anyone, not even your husband, convince you otherwise." Laughed it off, assuming he was being overprotective. "Lionel supports me, Dad. He's not trying to take credit for my work." My father's expression remained grave. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself, keep records, maintain your independence. Marriage is beautiful, but it shouldn't require you to diminish yourself." 3 months later, he was gone. My mother followed 18 months after that. Cancer that moved too quickly for treatment to be effective. Their deaths left me unmoored, vulnerable in ways I hadn't been before. And Lionel was there, steady and supportive, handling funeral arrangements, managing estate matters, being exactly the partner I needed during the darkest period of my life. Or so I thought. Now I wonder if he saw their deaths as removing the last people who truly knew me. Before him, the last witnesses to my independent success. With them gone, he could more easily rewrite our history, positioning himself as the architect of everything I had achieved. The Caroline who existed before meeting Lionel, driven, independent, unapologetically ambitious, began to fade. In her place emerged a woman who instinctively looked to her husband before making decisions, who downplayed her own business intuition in favor of his input, who gradually accepted his version of their shared story. It wasn't until I heard that recorded call that I remembered who I really was, and what I was capable of. My parents had raised me to stand on my own, to fight for what was mine, to recognize my own value. Somehow, I had forgotten those lessons along the way. But now, with Lionel's betrayal laid bare, I felt my true self reawakening. The daughter of John and Elizabeth Miller. The woman who had built something from nothing. The entrepreneur who had trusted too easily, but who now had her eyes wide open. And that woman? She wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days after discovering the recorded call, Lionel returned from his business conference in Portland. I greeted him at the door with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, though he was too preoccupied to notice. His cologne couldn't quite mask the unfamiliar perfume lingering on his skin, a detail I would have previously ignored or rationalized. "Away. How was Portland?" I asked, my voice steady as I took his suitcase. "Productive," he replied, loosening his tie as he moved past me into the house. "Exhausting, though. These development conferences drain me." I nodded, studying his profile as he checked his phone. The ease with which he lied was almost impressive. No hesitation, no telltale signs of deception. How many times had I believed these performances? How many fabricated business trips and late meetings had I accepted without question? I made dinner, I said, following him into the kitchen where I'd prepared his favorite meal. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and a bottle of the Pinot Noir we'd discovered on our trip to Willamette Valley 3 years earlier. He looked up, momentarily surprised by the effort. "What's the occasion? Do I need one?" I smiled, pouring him a glass of wine. "I thought we could talk about that new client I'm pitching next week, the Henderson account." The Henderson account was significant, a regional retail chain looking to rebrand completely. Landing it would increase our annual revenue by nearly 30%. Lionel knew this. We'd discussed the potential pitch multiple times before. "Sure," he said, taking a sip of wine. "Though I'm beat. Might not be the best sounding board tonight." We ate dinner with the practiced rhythm of a long-married couple. I asked about the conference, listening attentively as he fabricated details about panels and networking events. He inquired about the business in his absence, his interest perfunctory at best. To an observer, we might have appeared comfortable, content, a successful couple sharing the mundanities of their day. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, I was hyper-aware of every false note, every calculated gesture. The way he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, the subtle distance he maintained, both physically and emotionally, the careful way he steered our conversation away from specifics about our future plans. After dinner, Lionel retreated to his home office, claiming he needed to review some documents before morning. I cleaned the kitchen meticulously, using the routine task to organize my thoughts. Through the partially open office door, I could hear him speaking quietly on the phone, his tone intimate in a way it hadn't been with me in months. This was our life now. Parallel existences under one roof. Two people playing roles in a production neither had the courage to end. Except Lionel was planning to end it, on his terms, with everything that mattered to me in his possession. As I lay beside him that night, listening to his even breathing, I realized how thoroughly I had normalized his gradual withdrawal. I had attributed his emotional absence to stress, his disinterest in our relationship to the natural evolution of a long-term marriage. I had lowered my expectations incrementally, adjusting to each new reality until the distance between us seemed inevitable rather than engineered. The next morning returned us to our usual routine. Lionel was up early, dressed impeccably in one of the custom suits I had insisted on when his career began to advance. I prepared coffee and a light breakfast, asking about his schedule for the day as if I cared, as if I didn't know that every word between us now was performative. "Big meeting downtown, then client lunch at Altura," he said, checking his watch, the Rolex I had given him for our 5th anniversary. "Might be late tonight. Don't wait up." "The Henderson pitch is tomorrow," I reminded him. "I was hoping you could look over the final presentation this evening." He hesitated, clearly searching for a plausible excuse. "Email it to me. I'll review it between meetings and send you my thoughts." "I'd really appreciate your input on the financial projections in particular," I pressed, watching his reaction carefully. "You've always had a better head for those numbers than me." It was a deliberate understatement of my abilities, something I'd done often during our marriage to bolster his ego, to maintain the fiction that he was the business mind behind our success. Now, I used this established pattern to further my own agenda. "Fine," he conceded. "I'll try to be home by 8. I kissed his cheek as he left, a gesture that once held affection but now felt like part of an elaborate charade. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I moved to his office. I had 40 minutes before my first video call of the day, enough time for what I needed to do. Lionel's workspace was meticulously organized, another quality I had once admired. Now I recognized it as the behavior of someone with secrets to keep. His desk drawers were locked, but I knew where he kept the key, taped beneath the right corner of his desk blotter. A hiding place he thought was clever, but that I had discovered years ago during a search for a stapler. Inside the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of file folders, I found what I was looking for. A slim leather portfolio containing documents related to our finances. Bank statements, investment reports, property assessments, all marked with sticky notes in Lionel's precise handwriting. Annotations that revealed his intentions more clearly than any recorded conversation could. Potential leverage. Established in premarital period. Transfer completed. 3:15. Remove C's name before filing. I photographed each page methodically, careful to return everything exactly as I had found it. These documents alone confirmed what the recorded call had suggested. Lionel wasn't just planning to divorce me. He was actively working to disentangle our finances in ways that would leave me at a significant disadvantage. More concerning were the notations about our business. As my spouse during its period of significant growth, Lionel had a legitimate claim to a portion of its value. But these notes detailed a strategy to claim he had been the primary architect of its success, that my role had been merely operational while his business acumen had driven its growth. It was breathtaking in its audacity, and it might have worked if I hadn't been warned. Many of our clients knew us as a team. Lionel had been present at pitches, had participated in strategy sessions, had built relationships with key accounts. He had positioned himself perfectly to support a narrative that diminished my contributions. Replaced the portfolio, locked the drawer, and returned the key to its hiding place. Then I went upstairs to my home office, opened my laptop, and began a draft email to Lionel with the Henderson pitch attached. On the surface, everything remained normal. I conducted my video calls, reviewed creative briefs, provided feedback to my team. I maintained the appearance of a woman focused on her business, unaware of the seismic shifts occurring beneath her feet. But with each passing hour, my resolve strengthened and my plan crystallized. Lionel thought he knew me, my weaknesses, my blind spots, my trusting nature. He was counting on the Caroline who avoided conflict, who sought compromise, who valued harmony above all. He had no idea that woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone entirely new, forged in the crucible of his betrayal. The first hint that something wasn't right came on an ordinary Wednesday, about 3 years into our marriage. I was at home, working late on a presentation for a new client, when Lionel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was in the shower. We had plans to meet friends for dinner in an hour, and normally I wouldn't have glanced at his notifications. But the name that flashed across the screen caught my attention: Jennifer. I didn't know a Jennifer in Lionel's professional circle. He had never mentioned a colleague, client, or contact by that name. The notification disappeared before I could read the full message, but the preview was enough to create a small knot of unease in my stomach. Missing you already. Last night was... I set the phone down, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Perhaps it was a professional contact he hadn't mentioned. Perhaps it was an automated message from a service or app. Perhaps it was nothing at all. When Lionel emerged from the shower, I didn't mention it. I wasn't the type to question him about text messages or monitor his communications. Trust was the foundation of our relationship. At least, that's what I believed. But once that first seed of doubt was planted, I couldn't help but notice other small inconsistencies. The late meetings that had never appeared on his shared calendar. The business trips that seemed to multiply, often planned with minimal notice. The way he would step onto the patio to take certain calls, his voice too low for me to hear. "Who was that?" I asked one evening after he returned from a 15-minute call on the deck. "Just Robert from the Westlake project," he replied smoothly. "Some issues with the permit process." I nodded, accepting his explanation because questioning it would have meant questioning everything. But later that night, When I mentioned possibly joining him for dinner during his upcoming Portland trip, I had a client in the area I could meet. His reaction was subtly off. "That's not necessary," he said too quickly. "It's going to be all meetings and work dinners. You'd be bored." "I don't mind," I persisted. "I can work from the hotel during your meetings. It would be nice to have the evenings together." A flash of something, annoyance, concern, crossed his face before his expression settled back into neutral. "The schedule is really packed, Caroline. Let's plan a proper getaway another time when we can actually enjoy it." I let it go, telling myself I was being clingy, that Lionel needed his space to work effectively. But that night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, cataloging all the small ways he had become distant over the past few months. The casual physical affection that had once been constant between us had dwindled. Our conversations had become more superficial, focused on schedules and logistics rather than ideas and dreams. Even our intimate life had changed, less frequent, more perfunctory, with Lionel often claiming exhaustion or stress. These changes had happened so gradually that I had normalized each shift, adjusted my expectations accordingly, and convinced myself this was simply what happened in long-term relationships. The passion cooled, the excitement faded, the connection became more practical than emotional. Wasn't that what everyone said about marriage? But now, with that unexplained text message from Jennifer lingering in my mind, I began to question whether what we were experiencing was normal evolution or something more concerning. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I checked our phone bill. The detailed call log showed multiple calls to a number I didn't recognize, always during times when Lionel had told me he was working late or in meetings. The calls were lengthy, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes over an hour. Didn't confront him. I wasn't ready to have that conversation, wasn't prepared to hear whatever explanation or deflection he might offer. Instead, I began paying closer attention, not just to Lionel's behavior, but to my own willingness to accept it without question. 2 weeks later, another incident added to my growing unease. I was searching through our closet for a specific pair of shoes when I found a small gift bag tucked behind Lionel's winter boots. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a small key. The accompanying card read simply, "For keeping the most important things safe. J." It wasn't my birthday or our anniversary. There had been no occasion for which Lionel had given me a bracelet. This was clearly meant for someone else, someone whose name likely began with J, someone like Jennifer. I replaced everything exactly as I had found it, my hands shaking slightly. That night at dinner, I watched Lionel, across the table, searching for signs of the man I had married. He looked the same, the strong jawline I had always found attractive, the confident posture, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But something essential had changed, or perhaps it had never been there at all. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my scrutiny. "Just tired," I replied. "Big presentation tomorrow." He nodded, returning to his meal without further inquiry. Once, he would have asked about the presentation, offered to help me prepare, expressed confidence in my abilities. Now, he simply accepted my statement and moved on, as if my professional challenges were peripheral to his life rather than central to it. That night, I created a password-protected document on my laptop. In it, I began recording every inconsistency, every unexplained absence, every deflected question. I wasn't yet ready to put a name to what I suspected, but I needed to track these patterns to confirm that I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. Over the next several months, the evidence accumulated. Receipts for dinners at restaurants we had never visited together, during evenings when he was supposedly working late. Hotel charges in Seattle, our own city, on his credit card statement. The lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. The way he now kept his phone with him constantly, always face down, always protected with a passcode he never shared. I said nothing. Each new discovery was painful, but also clarifying. The fog of confusion and self-doubt began to lift, replaced by a growing certainty that our marriage was not what I had believed it to be. Lionel was living a double life, and I had been too trusting, too willing to make excuses for his behavior, to see it clearly. The final confirmation came on a rainy Tuesday in March. Lionel had left for a business dinner around 7, claiming he wouldn't be back until late. At 9, restless and unable to focus on work, I decided to drive to the small bakery across town that made the chocolate croissants Lionel loved. I thought perhaps I could surprise him with breakfast the next morning, a small gesture to remind him of our early days together. As I pulled into the parking lot of the upscale restaurant near the waterfront, I saw them. Lionel and a woman with sleek blonde hair standing close beneath the awning. His hand rested at the small of her back, with casual intimacy as he guided her toward his car. Our car, technically, since we had purchased it together. I didn't follow them. I didn't confront them. I simply drove home, my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed. When Lionel returned around midnight, I pretended to be asleep. And in the morning, I greeted him with the same smile I had worn for months, the one that never quite reached my eyes. "How was your meeting?" I asked, pouring him coffee. "Productive," he replied, not meeting my gaze. "We might have a new investor for the East Side project." I nodded, accepting his lie just as I had accepted all the others. But inside, something had shifted. The last remnants of denial had fallen away, leaving in their place a cold clarity. My husband was having an affair, and I needed to decide what I was going to do about it. After seeing Lionel with the blonde woman outside the restaurant, I entered a strange period of heightened awareness. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I suddenly noticed dozens of small details that had been present all along, but that I had willfully ignored. The world hadn't changed. My perception of it had. I began cataloging these observations methodically, adding them to my password-protected document with dates, times, and specific details, not just for my own sanity, but because some part of me already knew this information might be needed later, when everything fell apart. There was the way Lionel's business trips always seemed to coincide with key events in my professional life. He had been in Portland during my keynote speech at the Northwest Marketing Summit. He had meetings in Vancouver the weekend I was nominated for a Business Leadership Award. He had been stuck in San Francisco due to weather delays during the 10-year memorial service for my father. These absences, which I had once attributed to unfortunate timing, now revealed a pattern. Lionel systematically removed himself from situations where I might be celebrated or where he would be expected to play a supportive role. It wasn't just that he wanted time with his mistress, he wanted to avoid witnessing my individual success. Then there were the financial discrepancies. Small at first, easy to overlook, but increasingly significant. Unexplained withdrawals from our joint account. Credit card charges at high-end restaurants and hotels that weren't part of his legitimate business expenses. A steady increase in his personal spending category in our budget. One evening, as Lionel showered, I found myself staring at his wallet on the nightstand. I had never been the type to snoop. Privacy and trust had been values I held dear. But something compelled me to look inside. Behind his driver's license, I found a key card for the Archer Hotel downtown. Not a temporary room key, but a VIP access card, the kind given to frequent guests who book premium suites. I slipped it back where I had found it, my heart pounding. The Archer was less than 15 minutes from our home. Why would Lionel need a hotel room in the same city where we lived? The answer was obvious, but my mind still struggled to fully accept it. That night, As we sat on opposite ends of the sofa watching a documentary neither of us was truly interested in, I studied my husband's profile. The strong jawline I had once traced with my fingertips, the slight furrow between his brows when he concentrated. The lips that used to whisper love and promises against my skin. He was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, his mind clearly occupied with thoughts he had no intention of sharing. "Lionel," I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the background noise of the television. He turned, eyebrows raised in question. Are you happy? With me? With our life together?" For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, guilt, perhaps even a flash of the man I had once known. Then his expression smoothed into the polished mask I had grown, accustomed to. "Of course," he replied, his tone carefully modulated. "Why wouldn't I be?" I could have pushed further, could have mentioned the hotel keycard, the unexplained absences, the woman at the restaurant. Could have demanded the truth that was hovering in the air between us, unacknowledged but undeniable. Instead, I smiled slightly. "Just checking." He studied me for a moment, as if assessing whether I knew more than I was letting on. Then he reached across the sofa and squeezed my hand briefly before returning his attention to the documentary. The gesture was meant to be reassuring, a physical affirmation of his verbal response. But his touch felt foreign now, disconnected from any genuine emotion. That night marked a turning point. I stopped hoping for explanations that would somehow justify Lionel's behavior. Stopped telling myself that my suspicions were unfounded, that I was overreacting to normal fluctuations in a long-term relationship. Stopped making excuses for the growing distance between us. Instead, I began to prepare. I didn't know what form the end would take, whether Lionel would eventually confess, whether I would finally confront him, or whether our marriage would simply disintegrate under the weight of unspoken truths. But I knew with increasing certainty that an end was coming. And I had no intention of being caught unprepared when it did. The next morning, I opened a separate bank account at a different institution from the one we shared. I transferred a modest amount, enough to establish the account, but not so much that Lionel would notice if he checked our joint statements. I began gathering and securing copies of important documents, our marriage certificate, property deeds, business records, tax returns from the years before and during our marriage. I also started rebuilding connections that had atrophied during my marriage. Lionel had always been subtly dismissive of my college friends, finding reasons why we couldn't attend their gatherings or host them at our home. Over time, I had allowed these friendships to fade, focusing instead on the professional network we shared. Now, I reached out to old friends, arranged coffee dates and lunch meetings, re-established bonds that existed independently of Lionel. One of these reconnections proved particularly valuable. Eva Lawson had been my roommate in college, and though we had drifted apart over the years, she had always held a special place in my heart. Now a successful attorney specializing in family law, Eva listened without judgment as I carefully outlined some of my concerns, framing them as hypothetical questions about a client of mine who was facing similar issues. "Your client needs to document everything," Eva advised, her eyes telling me she understood perfectly well who we were really discussing. Dates, times, specific incidents, evidence of any financial irregularities or attempts to hide assets. Washington is an equitable distribution state. Marital property should be divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. I nodded, making mental notes. And if there's a business involved? One that existed before the marriage but grew substantially during it? Eva's expression grew more serious. That gets complicated. The increase in value during the marriage is generally considered community property, but establishing the baseline, value and tracking the growth requires careful documentation. Your client should consult with both a forensic accountant and a divorce attorney who specializes in business valuation issues. As I left our lunch meeting, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness that my marriage had deteriorated to the point where I was seeking divorce advice. Anger at Lionel's betrayal and apparent plans to claim what was rightfully mine. Fear about the uncertain future ahead. But beneath these swirling feelings was something unexpected, a growing sense of clarity and purpose. The fog of confusion and self-doubt was lifting. In its place emerged a clear-eyed understanding of my situation and what I needed to do to protect myself. Lionel had underestimated me. He assumed that because I had loved him, trusted him, built a life with him, I would be easy to deceive and manipulate. That was his mistake, and it would prove to be a costly one. Everything changed on the 15th of April. Ironically, tax day. A date when Americans traditionally confront financial realities they've been avoiding all year. It seemed fitting that on this day, I would discover the full extent of Lionel's deception. I had been gathering evidence methodically for weeks, building a clearer picture of his affair and financial maneuvers. But it was still largely circumstantial. Suspicious hotel charges, unexplained absences, the woman I'd glimpsed outside the restaurant. Nothing concrete enough to confront him with. Nothing that couldn't be explained away by someone as smooth and practiced at deception as my husband. That morning started like any other. Lionel left early for what he claimed was a breakfast meeting with investors, kissing my cheek absently as he grabbed his keys. I had a video conference scheduled with a client in Boston, followed by internal team meetings that would occupy most of my day. Ordinary Tuesday activities that offered no hint of the seismic shift about to occur. My first indication that something was wrong came around 10:30, when our home phone rang. We rarely received calls on that line. It was primarily for business purposes, with most of our personal communications happening via cell phones. I was in my home office reviewing design mock-ups and answered without checking the caller ID. Thompson residence, I said, my attention still half on the document open on my screen. Is this Mrs. Thompson? A man's voice asked. Yes, speaking. This is Doug from Northwest Telecom Systems. We've detected an issue with your business line that's causing calls to be rerouted incorrectly. Are you currently experiencing any problems with your service? I frowned, setting aside the mock-ups. No, everything seems to be working fine. Doug said, sounding genuinely perplexed. Our system is showing that when calls come into your business line, they're being inadvertently recorded and stored on our servers. Has your company requested call recording services? My breath caught slightly. No, we haven't. That's what I thought. This appears to be a technical error on our end. I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll need to reset your account settings, which will temporarily disable your voicemail system. Would that be acceptable? Actually, I said, an idea forming. Rapidly. Before you fix anything, could you tell me if there are recordings currently stored in the system? I'd hate to lose any important business calls. Doug hesitated. Yes, there are approximately 30 recordings from the past 2 weeks. I can have those transferred to your secure account portal if you'd like to review them before we correct the issue. That would be perfect, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. 20 minutes later, I received an email from Northwest Telecom with instructions for accessing the recordings. I logged in immediately, my hands slightly trembling as I navigated to the file storage section. The calls were listed chronologically, identified only by date, time, and duration. Most were mundane, clients leaving voicemails, vendors confirming, appointments, the expected communications of a busy marketing consultancy. I skimmed through them quickly, not sure what I was looking for, but driven by an instinct that something important was hidden among these accidental recordings. Then I found it, a 47-minute call from yesterday while I had been at a client meeting downtown. I clicked play, expecting perhaps another vendor message or client inquiry. Instead, I heard Lionel's voice, clear and unmistakable. Getting everything in order now, he was saying. The papers should be ready to file by the end of the month. Woman's voice responded, the the audio quality crystal clear. And she still has no idea? None. Caroline's completely focused on landing that Henderson account. She doesn't even notice what's happening with our finances. I sat perfectly still, my body gone cold as I listened to my husband and a woman I now identified as Jennifer discussing their plans for my future in clinical detail. The business valuation came back higher than we expected, Lionel continued, sounding pleased with himself. Nearly double what it was worth 3 years ago. And since we're in a community property state, and I've been integral to its growth. Jennifer laughed, the sound like glass breaking in my ears. You'll get half. At minimum, Lionel confirmed. My attorney thinks we can push for more, given my substantial contributions to its success. What about the house? Jennifer asked. I'll let her keep that, for now. The mortgage is substantial, and without the business income, she won't be able to maintain it. She'll be forced to sell within a year, and I'll get my share then. They were silent for a moment, and I heard the clink of glasses. They were celebrating, I realized, with a surge of nausea. Celebrating the dismantling of my life. What if she fights? Jennifer asked eventually. Lionel's laugh was dismissive. Caroline. She avoids conflict at all costs. Always has. By the time she realizes what's happening, everything will be settled, and even if she did fight, what evidence does she have? I've been careful. When will you tell her? After the Henderson deal closes. The commissions from that will be significant, and I want them included in the asset division. I listened as they continued, detailing how they had been planning this for over a year. How Lionel had been systematically positioning himself as essential to my business success. How he had been documenting every meeting, every client interaction, building a narrative that minimized my contributions and exaggerated his own. How he had been slowly, strategically moving certain assets beyond my immediate reach. She'll be left with nothing but debt, Lionel said confidently. We'll take the house, the business, everything she built. Jennifer's voice dropped lower, more intimate. And then we can finally be together openly. No more sneaking around. Just a few more weeks, Lionel agreed. Then everything changes. The recording continued, but I had heard enough. I sat motionless in my office chair, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air, oblivious to how my world had just shattered. But strangely, amid the devastation, I felt something unexpected: clarity. The suspicions, the doubts, the inconsistencies that had been accumulating for months all suddenly crystallized into perfect, terrible understanding. There was no more uncertainty, no more benefit of the doubt, no more alternative explanations. My husband and his mistress were plotting to strip me of everything I had built, and they believed I would let them do it without a fight. In that moment, as the recording continued playing their confident plans, something shifted inside me. The hurt was there, of course, a deep, throbbing ache that threatened to consume me, but alongside it grew something stronger, something colder and more focused: determination. They thought they knew me. Thought they could predict my reactions, manipulate my responses, count on my conflict avoidance and trusting nature. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I stopped the recording and reached for my phone. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed Eva Lawson's number. I need to meet with you, I said when she answered. Today. And I need you to recommend the best forensic accountant in Seattle. By the time I ended my call with Eva, my mind was racing with implications and possibilities. The accidental recording had changed everything, not just emotionally, but strategically. I now possessed what Eva called the smoking gun, irrefutable evidence of Lionel's intentions to defraud me in our divorce. But this information created a crucial decision point. How should I proceed? The obvious move would be immediate confrontation. To call Lionel, play the recording, watch his carefully constructed plans crumble in real time, The wounded part of me, the part still reeling from betrayal, craved that satisfaction. Eva had advised differently. "Don't show your hand," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The moment he knows you have this recording, he'll switch tactics. Right now, your greatest advantage is that he believes you're in the dark." I paced my home office, weighing my options. The sunshine that had seemed so bright earlier now felt harsh, exposing. I drew the curtains partially closed, creating shadows that matched my mood as I methodically analyzed the situation. Option 1. Immediate confrontation. Emotional release, but strategic disadvantage. Lionel would immediately implement whatever contingency plans he had prepared. He would accelerate his timeline, perhaps even fabricate some narrative where I was the villain, unstable, unreasonable, unfit to run the business we had built. Option 2. Maintain the facade. Continue as if nothing had changed while quietly building my case and securing my position. Play the long game, just as he had been doing. This approach required patience and emotional control, two qualities I wasn't sure I possessed in my current state. I stopped pacing and stared at the photograph on my desk. It showed Lionel and me on our honeymoon in Greece, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling into the camera with the Aegean Sea glittering behind us. We looked happy, genuine. Had it all been a performance even then? Or had there been a time when his feelings for me were real? It didn't matter now. The man in that photograph no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. The real Lionel was the one on the recording, coldly planning to strip me of everything I had worked for, laughing at the idea of leaving me with nothing but debt. I picked up the frame and opened the back, removing the photograph and setting it aside. In its place, I slipped a small note to myself. "He underestimates you. That is his weakness." I reassembled the frame and set it back on my desk, the image of our smiling faces now a reminder not of love lost, but of the strategic imperative before me. Lionel believed he knew me completely, my patterns, my responses, my weaknesses. He was counting on the Caroline who avoided confrontation, who sought compromise, who trusted too easily. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone he had never truly seen. Someone calculating, patient, and absolutely determined. "Play the part," I whispered to myself, "until it's time to rewrite the script." I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I had learned from the recording, noting specific details, account numbers mentioned, timelines discussed, names of associates or attorneys Lionel had referenced. When I finished, I called Morgan Reynolds, the divorce attorney Eva had recommended, and scheduled a consultation for the following morning. Next, I contacted Dr. Neil Winters, a forensic accountant specializing in high-conflict divorces and business valuations. His earliest availability was Thursday afternoon. I booked the appointment, emphasizing the confidential nature of our meeting. With these initial steps taken, I turned my attention to the most immediate challenge, facing Lionel that evening without revealing what I now knew. Could I look into the eyes of the man who had betrayed me so completely and pretend that nothing had changed? Could I smile and discuss mundane details of our day while he plotted my financial destruction? I had to. Not just for strategic advantage, but because I needed time. Time to secure my business. Time to document our financial history. Time to build an unassailable case before Lionel realized I was fighting back. To test my acting abilities, I called Lionel's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual, slightly distracted. "Hey, what's up?" I kept my tone light, matching his. "Just wondering if you'll be home for dinner. I was thinking of making that salmon you like." "Should be," he replied. "Meeting's wrapping up soon? Say 7? "Perfect," I said, amazed at how normal I sounded. "See you then." I ended the call and exhaled slowly. I could do this. I could play. the role of unsuspecting wife while systematically preparing for the battle ahead. Lionel had spent months, perhaps years, crafting his performance. I could maintain mine for as long as necessary. That evening, I prepared his favorite meal with mechanical precision: herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, a bottle of expensive Chardonnay. I wore the blue dress he had always complimented, applied makeup with care, arranged my hair in the loose waves he preferred. Every detail designed to reinforce his perception of me as predictable, unsuspecting Caroline. When he arrived home, I greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. But he never noticed the difference. He kissed my cheek absently, commented on the delicious smell coming from the kitchen, and retreated to his office to wrap up a few emails before dinner. I watched him go, studying the familiar slope of his shoulders, the confident stride, the way he ran his hand through his hair as he turned the corner. This man, who had once been the center of my world, now felt like a stranger, dangerous, calculating, utterly foreign. Over dinner, we engaged in the kind of superficial conversation that had become our norm. He discussed a development project his firm was considering. I shared updates about the Henderson account. He complimented the meal. I asked about his breakfast meeting that morning. A perfectly choreographed dance of meaningless exchanges, neither of us revealing our true thoughts. "You seem different tonight," Lionel remarked suddenly, studying me over his wine glass. "Everything okay?" My heart raced, but my expression remained neutral. "Just tired," I replied with a small shrug. "The Henderson presentation is taking a lot out of me." He nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "You'll nail it. You always do." I smiled, meeting his gaze directly. "I intend to." Later, as we prepared for bed, I caught Lionel watching me with a slight frown, as if trying to identify what had changed. I had been careful, maintaining the same patterns, the same responses, the same deferential attitude that had characterized our relationship for years. But perhaps some subtle shift in my energy had registered subconsciously. "You sure everything's okay?" he asked as we slipped beneath the covers. "You've been quiet tonight." I turned toward him, studying his face in the soft lamplight. The face I had once loved. The face that had lied to me countless times. "I've just been thinking," I said softly. "About what?" I paused, allowing a calculated vulnerability to show in my expression. "About us. About how much has changed since we got married." A flicker of unease crossed his features before his expression smoothed into concern. "Changed how?" "We used to talk more, share more, be more present with each other." I kept my tone wistful rather than accusatory. "I miss that connection." Lionel's response was immediate and practiced. He reached for my hand, his expression softening into the caring husband persona he had perfected. "Work has been intense for both of us. Once the Henderson deal closes, we should take some time away together. Reconnect." I nodded, letting him believe his performance had reassured me. "I'd like that." As he turned out the light and settled into sleep, I lay awake beside him, my mind absolutely clear. The decision had been made. I would play along with his charade, matching performance for performance, until every piece of my counteroffensive was in place. Lionel believed he was the strategic one, the planner, the one thinking 3 moves ahead. He had no idea I was already mapping the endgame. The next morning, I rose before Lionel, showered quickly, and dressed with particular care. I chose a tailored charcoal pantsuit that projected both professionalism and determination, appropriate attire for my meeting with Morgan Reynolds, though Lionel believed I was simply preparing for a client presentation. "I'll be at the office all day," I told him casually over coffee. "The Henderson team wants to review the entire strategy before tomorrow's pitch." He nodded absently, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Good luck with the prep. I've got back-to-back meetings myself. Probably won't be home until late. With awe. Another woman, I thought, watching him adjust his tie. The blue silk one I had given him last Christmas. How many times had he dressed carefully for her, using gifts from me to make himself more attractive to his mistress? The thought should have hurt, but instead, it merely reinforced my resolve. Don't wait up, he added, brushing a perfunctory kiss against my cheek before heading for the door. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I gathered the materials I had prepared the previous evening. Financial statements, business records, the flash drive containing the recorded call, and detailed notes about patterns I had observed in Lionel's behavior and our finances. Then I drove downtown to Morgan Reynolds's office in the Columbia Center. Morgan was not what I had expected. Based on her reputation as Seattle's most formidable divorce attorney, I had imagined someone older, perhaps severe in appearance. Instead, I found myself facing a woman roughly my own age, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. This was not someone who would waste time on meaningless reassurances or emotional hand-holding. "Tell me everything," she said after the preliminaries were complete. "Start with the recording." I played it for her, watching her expression shift from professional interest to focused intensity as she listened to Lionel and Jennifer planning my financial destruction. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "This is gold," she said simply. "Absolute gold. But we need more." For the next 2 hours, we dissected my marriage and finances with clinical precision. Morgan asked probing questions about when certain assets were acquired, how our business had grown, what roles Lionel had actually played versus what he claimed to have contributed. She took detailed notes, occasionally stopping to request clarification or additional documentation. "Here's what we're going to do," she said finally, setting down her pen. "First, we're going to secure your business assets. Based on what you've told me, Lionel has been systematically positioning himself to claim he was instrumental to your company's growth and therefore entitled to a significant portion of its value." I nodded. "He's been attending client meetings, participating in strategy sessions, making sure he's visible to our team and clients." "Exactly. We need to document your role as the primary force behind the business's success. Gather emails, client testimonials, employee statements, anything that establishes you as the driving creative and strategic force." She tapped her pen against her notepad, her expression thoughtful. "Second, we need to track and document every financial move he's made in the past year, especially any attempts to hide or redirect assets. Dr. Winters will help with that during your meeting tomorrow." "And third?" I asked. Morgan's smile was sharp. "Third, we wait for him to make his move. Based on the recording, he's planning to file for divorce after the Henderson deal closes. That gives us time to prepare a comprehensive counteroffensive." So, I continue pretending. "Nothing is wrong?" "Exactly. The longer he believes you're in the dark, the more advantage we have. Think of it as gathering intelligence behind enemy lines." The military metaphor was apt. This wasn't just a dissolving marriage. It was a strategic conflict with clearly defined objectives. Lionel had declared war on my financial future. I was simply preparing to defend myself and perhaps launch a few offensive maneuvers of my own. As I left Morgan's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The path forward was clear, the objectives defined. My emotions, the hurt, the betrayal, the lingering disbelief were still present, but they had been compartmentalized, set aside in favor of practical action. My next step was to secure the company's core intellectual assets. While Lionel might claim a stake in the business's financial value, he had no legitimate claim to our proprietary methodologies, client relationships, or creative processes. These were the true heart of Caroline Miller Consulting, and I needed to ensure they remained intact regardless of what happened with the business entity itself. I spent the afternoon meeting with Paris Chen, my chief creative officer and closest ally within the company. I had hired Paris 3 years earlier, shortly after launching the consultancy, and she had been instrumental in developing our unique approach to client campaigns. More importantly, she had no ties to Lionel, no loyalty, no friendship, not even particularly positive feelings. She saw him clearly for what he was, a charming opportunist who contributed little of substance while claiming significant credit. "I need your help with something confidential," I told her after closing my office door. I didn't share the full situation, not yet, but explained that I was conducting a business continuity exercise to ensure our core methodologies and client relationships were properly documented and secured. Paris didn't question my explanation, though her raised eyebrow suggested she sensed there was more to the story. We spent hours reviewing our client roster, identifying key relationships, documenting our proprietary processes, and creating secure backups of all essential creative and strategic materials. "If something happened to the company," I asked casually as we worked, "what would you need to maintain our client relationships and continue delivering our services?" Paris considered the question seriously. "Access to our methodology documentation, the client history database, our design templates and strategic frameworks." She glanced at me curiously. "Are you expecting something to happen?" "Just being thorough," I replied smoothly. "The business has grown significantly, which means increased risk. It's prudent to have contingency plans." By late afternoon, we had created comprehensive documentation of everything that made Caroline Miller Consulting valuable beyond its financial statements. I stored copies in multiple secure locations, ensuring that even if Lionel succeeded in claiming a portion of the business entity itself, the essence of what I had built remained protected. My final task for the day was perhaps the most challenging. I needed to review our client contracts, particularly for major accounts like Henderson, to understand exactly how Lionel's name appeared in these documents and what claims he might reasonably make regarding his contributions. Most contracts listed the company as the service provider, with me identified as the principal consultant. But in several more recent agreements, Lionel's name appeared alongside mine as a strategic advisor or business development consultant. These references, while seemingly minor, could bolster his claim to being integral to the company's success. I made detailed notes of each instance, documenting the actual work Lionel had performed versus what he claimed to have contributed. Most cases, his involvement had been peripheral at best, attending occasional meetings, making introductory connections, offering cursory feedback on presentations I had developed. Nothing that justified the sweeping claims I had heard him make on the recorded call. As I drove home that evening, physically exhausted but mentally energized, I reflected on how quickly my focus had shifted from emotional response to strategic action. The pain of Lionel's betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath everything else, but it no longer dominated my thoughts. Instead, I was consumed with practical considerations, documenting assets, securing evidence, building a case that would protect what was rightfully mine. Lionel had made a critical error in his calculations. He assumed that my trusting nature, my tendency toward compromise, my avoidance of conflict were weaknesses to be exploited. He failed to recognize that these same qualities, when channeled toward a clear objective, became formidable strengths. Patience, thoroughness, and the ability to play the long game. He thought he knew me completely. He was about to discover how wrong he was. My meeting with Dr. Neil Winters, the forensic accountant, was even more illuminating than I had anticipated. Within an hour of reviewing our financial records, he had identified a pattern that had completely escaped my notice. "See these transfers?" he asked, pointing to a series of transactions on our joint account statements. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, another 6,000, all moving to this same account number at intervals just under the reporting threshold. I leaned closer, studying the statements. I assumed those were related to his real estate developments. He often needs to transfer funds for project costs. Neil shook his head, his expression grave. These aren't going to any business account I can identify. And the pattern is telling. Consistently under $10,000 to avoid triggering bank reporting requirements, but cumulatively substantial. Over the past 18 months, he's moved approximately $175,000 out of your joint accounts this way. The figure hit me with physical force. $175,000, diverted systematically, deliberately, with clear intent to conceal. This wasn't just preparation for divorce. This was premeditated financial betrayal on a scale I hadn't imagined. Can we trace where the money went? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. Already working on it, Neil replied. But that's not all. Take a look at these. He slid another set of documents across the table. Loan applications in Lionel's name alone, using our joint assets as collateral. He's been taking out equity loans against the house, Neil explained. 3 of them in the past year, totaling about $320,000. None of this appears to have gone into your joint accounts or known business ventures. Nearly $500,000, siphoned away without my knowledge. The methodical nature of it was almost impressive. A slow, careful extraction of wealth designed to go unnoticed until it was too late. There's more, Neil continued, his tone matter of fact. He's been making regular payments to an LLC called Horizon Ventures. On paper, it's a real estate investment company, but the ownership structure is interesting. The primary stakeholder is Jennifer Harlow. The name sent a jolt through me. Jennifer, the woman from the recorded call, Lionel's mistress. So he's been funding her company? I asked, trying to understand the implications. Not exactly. Based on my preliminary research, Horizon Ventures doesn't appear to have any actual real estate holdings or development projects. It looks more like a shell company, a place to park assets or funnel money while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business activity. I sat back in my chair, absorbing this information. Lionel hadn't just been preparing for divorce. He had been actively hiding assets, creating financial structures designed to protect his resources while positioning himself to claim mine. This was beyond betrayal. It was fraud. What do we do with this? I asked. Neil's expression was grim but determined. We build a case, document everything. Create a financial timeline showing when and how these transfers occurred, correlating them with his access to information about your business's growth and value. And we keep digging. There's likely more we haven't uncovered yet. By the time I left Neil's office that afternoon, I had a much clearer picture of what I was facing. Lionel had been systematically dismantling our financial partnership for well over a year, while simultaneously positioning himself to claim a significant portion of my business. It was calculated, deliberate, and thoroughly damning. I drove home, in a state of cold fury, my mind racing with implications. The magnitude of Lionel's deception went beyond anything I had imagined. This wasn't an affair that had led to divorce planning. This was a long-term strategy to strip me of everything I had built while building a new life with another woman, funded in part by resources he had diverted from our marriage. When I arrived home, I found a message from Lionel on our answering machine. Working late again. Don't wait up. His voice was casual, slightly distracted, the tone of a busy professional juggling too many responsibilities. Not the voice of a man who had spent months methodically betraying his wife. Alone in the house we had shared for years, I allowed myself a moment of raw emotion. I walked through each room slowly, seeing it with new eyes, not as our home, but as an asset Lionel planned to force me to sell after taking half its value. The kitchen where I had prepared countless meals while he told me about his day, omitting the parts spent with Jennifer. The living room where we had entertained friends, maintaining the illusion of a happy couple while he diverted funds to secret accounts. The bedroom where he had held me, made love to me, while planning my financial destruction. In our home office, I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer, removing a bottle of aged scotch I kept for special occasions. I poured 2 fingers into a crystal tumbler, a wedding gift from Lionel's parents, and raised it in a silent toast to the marriage that had died without my knowledge, mourned only by one spouse. Then I set the glass down untouched, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Emotional indulgence was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when there was so much at stake, not when Lionel's plans were so advanced, not when every day counted in my race to secure what was rightfully mine. I placed a call to Morgan Reynolds, updating her on what Neil had discovered. Her response was immediate and decisive. "This changes our timeline," she said. "With active financial fraud documented, we don't need to wait for him to file first. We can go on the offensive." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means we file for divorce on our terms, with comprehensive documentation of his financial misconduct. We request emergency orders to freeze assets, block further transfers, and secure your business interests. And we do it soon, before he realizes you're onto him." The prospect of accelerating the confrontation sent a wave of anxiety through me. I had been preparing myself for a longer game, one where I gathered evidence meticulously while maintaining the pretense of normalcy. Taking direct action meant ending the charade, facing Lionel across a battlefield of our own making. "How soon?" I asked, mentally calculating what still needed to be secured. "Give me 1 week to prepare the filings," Morgan replied. "During that time, continue documenting everything. And Caroline, don't change your behavior, not even slightly. The moment he suspects something, he'll accelerate his own plans." After hanging up, I sat motionless, absorbing the reality of what was coming. 1 week, 7 days to prepare for the confrontation that would end my marriage and begin a battle for everything I had worked to build. I thought back to the recorded call that had started this cascade of revelations. Lionel's confident voice, so certain of his plan's success. His dismissive laughter when discussing my likely reaction. His absolute conviction that I would be easily outmaneuvered, left with nothing while he started a new life with Jennifer, enriched by the fruits of my labor. The anger that rose in me wasn't hot and volatile. It was cold, focused, clarifying. Lionel had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had mistaken my trust for weakness, my compromise for lack of resolve, my avoidance of conflict for inability to fight. It was time to show him exactly how wrong he was. The week that followed was a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I maintained the appearance of normality, running my business, preparing for the Henderson pitch, interacting with Lionel with the same measured cordiality that had characterized our relationship for months. By night, I worked with single-minded focus to build an unassailable case against him and secure my future. Morgan Reynolds became my general, coordinating a team that included Neil Winters, a private investigator named Archie Sullivan, and a business valuation expert who specialized in marketing consultancies. Together, they formed a war cabinet dedicated to one objective: ensuring that Lionel's carefully constructed plans collapsed completely. 3 days after my meeting with Neil, the private investigator delivered his preliminary findings. Archie was a former police detective with a quiet demeanor and methodical approach that belied the devastating nature of his discoveries. "I've confirmed the relationship with Jennifer Harlow," he reported as we sat in Morgan's office. "They've been involved for approximately 22 months, based on hotel records, restaurant reservations, and witness statements. 22 months. Nearly 2 years of deception, running parallel to my life with Lionel like an alternate reality I hadn't known existed. Their pattern is consistent," Archie continued. "Weekly meetings at the Archer Hotel downtown, usually Wednesday afternoons. Weekend trips coinciding with Lionel's business travel. Regular dinners at restaurants outside. Your usual social circles." He slid a folder across the table containing photographs, Lionel and Jennifer entering the hotel, dining together, walking hand in hand through a park I didn't recognize. I forced myself to look at each image dispassionately, as if they depicted strangers rather than my husband and his mistress. "What about the financial angle?" Morgan asked, steering the conversation away from the affair itself to the more legally relevant issues. Archie nodded. "That's where it gets interesting. Jennifer Harlow was previously employed at Western Trust Bank, specifically in their business lending division. She would have had extensive knowledge of how to structure transactions to avoid detection and how to create legitimate-appearing business entities." "The perfect partner in financial fraud," Neil commented. "Exactly," Archie agreed. "Horizon Ventures, the LLC Neil identified, appears to be just the tip of the iceberg. I've found connections to two other entities, Lakeside Properties and NW Development Group. Both list Jennifer as the principal, but Lionel appears to be funding them through a series of increasingly complex transactions." The picture becoming clearer was both disturbing and clarifying. Lionel and Jennifer hadn't just been having an affair. They had been building an alternative financial ecosystem, funded in part by resources diverted from our marriage and designed to be untouchable when Lionel eventually filed for divorce. "What about the business?" I asked, bringing the conversation to my primary concern. "Have you found evidence of his plans regarding Caroline Miller Consulting?" Morgan exchanged glances, with Neil before responding. "Yes, and it's concerning. We've discovered documentation suggesting he's been systematically positioning himself as instrumental to your major client relationships. There are emails to your financial team requesting detailed valuation information, ostensibly for tax planning purposes. And most troubling, he appears to have been in communication with Donovan Wright at Paragon Consulting." I stiffened. Paragon was our largest competitor, a firm that had tried to acquire my company twice in the past 3 years. Donovan Wright, their CEO, was known for aggressive business tactics and had made no secret of his desire to absorb our client roster and creative team. "You think he's planning to force a sale to Paragon after the divorce?" I asked, my mind racing through implications. "It's a possibility we need to consider," Morgan confirmed. "A forced sale would convert your business into liquid assets, which would be easier to divide, and easier for him to claim a significant portion of." The revelation sent a chill through me. Lionel wasn't just planning to take half of what I had built. He was potentially plotting to dismantle it entirely, selling the pieces to a competitor who would strip it for parts. My team, my clients, my creative vision, all sacrificed to maximize his financial gain. "That's not going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "What do we do next?" Morgan leaned forward, her expression intensely focused. "We accelerate. Our timeline. Based on these findings, we can pursue emergency orders to freeze assets, prevent any business negotiations regarding your company, and secure temporary control of all jointly held properties." "On what grounds?" I asked. "Financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty," Morgan replied without hesitation. "The evidence we've gathered demonstrates that Lionel has been systematically violating his legal obligations as your spouse by diverting marital assets and conspiring to undervalue your contributions to jointly held property." She outlined a comprehensive strategy. "We would file for divorce on Monday morning, requesting emergency hearings regarding the financial issues. Simultaneously, we would secure the business through a series of legal maneuvers designed to prevent any transactions or negotiations without court approval. We would also deploy a forensic team to fully document the extent of Lionel's financial deceptions, creating an unassailable record for the court." "What about the Henderson account?" I asked, thinking of the pitch scheduled for the following day, the account Lionel had specifically mentioned wanting to include in our marital assets. "Land it," Morgan advised without hesitation. "Secure the client, sign the contract, and make sure it's in the company's name with you as the primary contact. The more value you add to the business before filing, the stronger our position regarding your contributions." As the meeting concluded, I felt a strange sense of calm. The path forward was clear, the strategy comprehensive, the team assembled. All that remained was to maintain my performance for a few more days, to play the role Lionel expected while preparations for his downfall proceeded behind the scenes. That evening, as I prepared for the Henderson pitch, Lionel called to say he would be home late again. His voice was light, almost cheerful, the voice of a man who believed everything was proceeding according to plan. "Good luck tomorrow," he said, referring to the pitch. "I know you'll close it." "Thank you," I replied, matching his casual tone. "I think it's going to go well." "I wish I could be there," he continued, the lie flowing effortlessly. "But this development meeting can't be rescheduled." "I understand," I said, and in that moment, I truly did understand. Not just his absence, but the entirety of our marriage. A performance on both sides, though for entirely different reasons. Some things can't be avoided. As I hung up, I realized that would likely be one of our last normal conversations before everything changed. In less than a week, the careful facade we had both maintained would shatter completely. Lionel would find himself facing not the compliant, conflict-avoidant wife he expected, but an opponent who had anticipated his every move and countered it before he even realized the game had changed. The thought brought no joy, only a grim determination to protect what was mine. Lionel had chosen this battlefield. He was about to discover he had severely underestimated his opponent. The Henderson pitch went exactly as planned. I stood before their executive team, outwardly composed while inwardly channeling every ounce of determination my circumstances had forged. This wasn't just another client presentation. It was the first concrete step in reclaiming my life and business from Lionel's machinations. "What sets Caroline Miller Consulting apart," I explained, displaying our proposed campaign strategy, "is our integrated approach to brand storytelling. We don't just create marketing materials, we develop narrative ecosystems that evolve with your customers' needs." The Henderson team was engaged, responsive, asking precisely the kinds of questions that indicated serious interest. Their chief marketing officer, Heidi Marshall, was particularly animated during the discussion of implementation timelines. "Your proposal addresses concerns our previous agency never quite grasped," she noted, "especially regarding the Midwest. Market expansion." By the meeting's end, the energy in the room was unmistakable. We weren't just being considered, we were the clear frontrunners. As we gathered our materials, Heidi pulled me aside. "I don't normally say this before the official decision," she said quietly, "but you should prepare to begin work next week. The board is meeting tomorrow morning, but it's essentially a formality." I maintained professional composure, thanking her for the confidence while expressing appropriate enthusiasm about the potential collaboration. Inside, though, a calculated satisfaction was building. This account, the very one Lionel had specifically planned to include in our divorce assets, would now serve a very different purpose in the coming legal battle. As I drove back to the office, I received a text from Lionel. "How did it go?" I paused, considering my response. Too much enthusiasm might trigger his interest in attending the contract signing, something I needed to avoid. Too little might seem suspicious given the account's importance. "Promising," I replied finally. "They're deciding tomorrow but seemed receptive." "Great job," came his immediate response. "Told you you'd nail it. Dinner tonight to celebrate the potential win?" The invitation was unexpected. Lionel had been conspicuously absent from our home in recent days, his excuses increasingly perfunctory. "Why the sudden interest in celebration?" "Sure," I texted back. "Bellini's at 7? I suggested one of our regular restaurants. Upscale but not intimate. Perfect for maintaining appearances without emotional complications." "Perfect. See you there." Back at the office, I gathered my executive team for a confidential meeting. The time had come to secure their loyalty and prepare them for the turbulence ahead. Paris Chen, my creative director, was the first to speak after I outlined the situation in carefully measured terms. I hadn't revealed the full extent of Lionel's betrayal, just enough to make clear that significant changes were coming, and that the company's leadership needed to be unified. "I always thought something was off with him," Paris said, her direct manner as refreshing as ever. The way he'd show up at client meetings he hadn't prepared for, then somehow take credit in the follow-up conversations. Robert Delacour, our chief financial officer, looked troubled. "He's been requesting unusual financial reports for months, historical performance metrics, client-by-client profitability analyses. I assumed it was for business development purposes." "It was," I confirmed grimly. "Just not the kind of business development we thought." I outlined the contingency plans I'd developed with Morgan and Neil, how we'd protect ongoing projects, secure client relationships, and maintain operational continuity during what would likely be a contentious legal process. "I want to be absolutely clear," I emphasized, making eye contact with each team member. "This company, its creative vision, its client approach, its culture, these come from me and from all of you, not from Lionel. His contributions, while real, have been substantially overstated in his own narrative. The coming weeks will require each of you to be unambiguous about this reality when asked." The team's response was unanimous and immediate. They had always known who truly led the company, who developed the methodologies, who built and maintained the client relationships. Lionel had been a presence, occasionally useful but never essential. They would stand firm on this truth. By late afternoon, I had secured written statements from key team members detailing their understanding of the company's leadership structure and Lionel's actual role. I had also spoken privately with our 3 largest clients, excluding Henderson, to subtly reinforce my position as the primary relationship holder and creative lead. As I prepared for dinner with Lionel, I received a call from Morgan. "The filings are ready," she informed me. "We can submit first thing Monday morning and request the emergency hearing for asset protection by Wednesday." "Perfect timing," I replied. "The Henderson contract should be signed by Tuesday afternoon." "And you're maintaining appearances until then?" Morgan confirmed. "Absolutely. In fact, I'm having dinner with him tonight at Bellini's." Morgan's tone sharpened. "Be careful. If he suspects anything, he might accelerate his own timeline." Her warning lingered in my mind as I dressed for dinner, selecting a navy blue dress. That projected confidence while revealing nothing of my internal state. I applied makeup carefully, ensuring I looked exactly as Lionel would expect. Professional, put together, utterly unaware of the seismic shifts about to reshape my life. Bellini's was busy when I arrived, the Thursday evening crowd a mix of business, professionals, and upscale couples. Lionel was already seated at our usual table near the windows, checking his phone with the distracted air that had become his standard posture in my presence. He stood when he saw me, greeting me with a kiss on the cheek and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look nice," he commented as I took my seat. "Thank you," I replied, studying him with new awareness. The man across from me was both intimately familiar and completely unknown. The husband whose betrayal I had documented in meticulous detail. The opponent whose strategy I had systematically dismantled before he even realized we were at war. Dinner proceeded with the practiced rhythm of a long-married couple. We discussed safe topics: the Henderson pitch, an upcoming city arts festival, a mutual friend's recent promotion. I matched his energy precisely, maintaining the same level of engagement I had demonstrated in recent months. Pleasant but not overly warm, interested but not deeply connected. "I've been thinking," Lionel said as we finished our entrees, his tone carefully casual. "After the Henderson deal closes, we should take some time to reassess things. Our schedules, our priorities." I kept my expression neutral, though internally my awareness heightened. This was it. The opening move in the conversation he had been planning. the gentle prelude to what would eventually become divorce discussions. "What kind of reassessment?" I asked, taking a measured sip of wine. "You know, big picture stuff. Where we're headed, what we want individually and together." He paused, studying me. "The business has grown so much, maybe it's time to consider bringing in additional leadership, maybe even positioning for acquisition." There it was, the first tangible hint of his true intentions regarding my company. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this idea for the first time. "That's quite a shift from our previous discussions about keeping the business independent," I observed, careful to keep my tone curious rather than confrontational. He shrugged slightly. "Markets change, opportunities evolve. Sometimes the smartest move is knowing when to cash out." I allowed a small smile, one that revealed nothing of my true thoughts. "You may be right. Timing is everything, isn't it?" Lionel's answering smile was confident, almost smug. He clearly interpreted my response as receptiveness to his suggestion, the first step in his carefully orchestrated plan to guide me toward relinquishing control of my company. "Exactly," he agreed, raising his glass slightly. To perfect timing, I clinked my glass against his, maintaining eye contact. To getting exactly what we deserve. He had no idea how true those words would prove to be. Monday morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that often follows momentous decisions. I woke before dawn, the house quiet save for Lionel's steady breathing beside me. For a moment, I simply watched him sleep. This man who had shared my bed, my home, my life for 8 years. The man who had methodically plotted to strip me of everything I had built. He looked peaceful, unburdened by the weight of his deceptions, or the knowledge of what was about to unfold. I slipped from bed without waking him, and prepared for the day with deliberate care. Today would be remembered as the turning point, the day Lionel Thompson stopped being a victim and became an adversary Lionel never anticipated. "Early meeting?" Lionel asked groggily as I finished dressing. "Henderson follow-up," I replied smoothly. "They've requested some additional materials before finalizing their decision." He nodded, already reaching for his phone to check messages. "Good luck. Let me know how it goes." "I will," I promised, knowing this would be the last normal exchange between us. I arrived at Morgan's office by 7:30, reviewed the divorce filing one final time, and signed my name with steady hands. The document was comprehensive. 73 pages detailing Lionel's financial misconduct, the diversion of marital assets, the evidence of his affair with Jennifer, and the apparent conspiracy to undervalue my contributions to our shared enterprises. "Once this is filed, there's no going back," Morgan reminded me. "The emergency hearings, the financial disclosures, the public nature of divorce proceedings, it will all become very real, very quickly." "I understand," I said, my resolve unwavering. "File it." Morgan nodded to her assistant, who left immediately for the courthouse with the documents. By 9:30, it was official. Lionel Thompson versus Lionel Thompson, case number 2023 DM 4587, filed in King County Superior Court with requests for emergency hearings regarding asset protection and temporary financial restraining orders. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 began immediately, protecting the business. While Morgan handled the legal filings, I met with the rest of my executive team at our downtown office. The mood was somber but determined as I outlined what would happen next. "As of this morning, I've filed for divorce from Lionel," I informed them. "Based on evidence we've gathered, there's reason to believe he may attempt to interfere with company operations or assets. Effective immediately, we're implementing the contingency protocols we discussed last week. These protocols were comprehensive. New banking authorizations requiring my signature for any expenditure over $5,000, temporary suspension of Lionel's building access and system permissions, secure backups of all client materials and proprietary methodologies, direct communication with key clients reassuring them of continuity. Robert, our CFO, had already prepared the necessary financial documentation. "I've established the separate operating account we discussed," he confirmed. "All incoming client payments will be directed there, with the transition appearing seamless to clients." Paris had her team standing by to manage client communications. "We've prepared individual messages for our top 20 clients, emphasizing that creative direction and account management remain unchanged. The messaging positions this as a routine security update, nothing that would cause concern." By 11 o'clock, the business was effectively secured against immediate interference. Any attempt by Lionel to access company systems, divert funds, or contact clients would now be flagged, documented, and prevented. Phase 3 was perhaps the most delicate, the Henderson contract. I had received confirmation that morning. We had won the account, exactly as Heidi had predicted. The contract signing was scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon. Under normal circumstances, Lionel would have attended such a significant business milestone. His absence needed to appear natural, unremarkable. I composed a text to him. "Great news. Henderson confirmed they're moving forward with us. Contract signing at 3 p.m. today." His response came quickly. "Fantastic. I can clear my schedule to be there." This was the critical moment. I needed to prevent his attendance without raising suspicions. I waited 15 minutes before replying, as if I'd been in a meeting. "No need to disrupt your day. It's just paperwork at this point. The creative presentation was the real challenge. I've got it covered." Another pause, then his response. "If you're sure. We should celebrate tonight, though. Dinner at Canlis?" Canlis, the most expensive restaurant in Seattle, the place we reserved for truly significant occasions. His suggestion indicated just how valuable he considered the Henderson account to be. "Perfect," I replied. "See you there at 7. With Lionel's absence from the contract signing secured, I proceeded with the final aspects of our plan. By 2 o'clock, I was in a conference room with Heidi Marshall and Henderson's legal team, reviewing the agreement that would cement our partnership. By 3:15, I had signed the contract as president and CEO of Caroline Miller Consulting, with no mention of Lionel anywhere in the document. As I left the Henderson offices, contract secured, I received a call from Morgan. "The emergency hearing is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow," she informed me. "Judge Ramsey will handle it. She's known for taking financial misconduct seriously. And Caroline? The sheriff's office has confirmed they'll serve Lionel with the divorce papers at his office at 4:30 today." I checked my watch. 3:45 p.m., in less than an hour. Lionel would be confronted with the reality that his carefully constructed plans had not only failed, but had been countered with a precision he never anticipated. "Do we know if he's actually at his office?" I asked. The investigator confirmed his car is in the building parking garage. "He's there." I thanked her and ended the call, experiencing a strange calm despite the knowledge that my marriage was officially ending, that confrontation was inevitable, that the life I had known was transforming irrevocably. As I drove back to my office, my phone began ringing continuously. First Lionel, then again, then a third time. I let the calls go to voicemail. Then the texts started. 3:37 p.m. "Caroline, call me immediately." 4:38 p.m. "What the hell is this? Divorce papers? Financial misconduct?" 4:40 p.m. "You need to call me right now." 4:45 p.m. "I'm coming to your office. We need to talk about whatever's going on here." I forwarded the messages to Morgan, who immediately responded, "Stay at your office. Security has been briefed. He cannot legally remove any documents or materials from the premises now that the emergency orders have been filed." At 5:03 p.m., Lionel burst through the reception area of Caroline Miller Consulting, his face flushed with anger, divorce papers clutched in his hand. The security guard I had arranged to be present moved to intercept him, but I gestured for him to stand down. "My office," I said calmly, turning to lead the way. Lionel followed, visibly struggling to contain his fury until the door closed behind us. Then he slammed the papers down on my desk. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Financial misconduct? Hidden assets? What game are you playing, Caroline?" I met his gaze steadily, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Not as my husband, not as my partner, but as someone who had calculated that I could be deceived, diminished, and discarded, without consequence. "It's not a game, Lionel," I replied, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "And I'm not playing." Lionel stared at me, his expression cycling rapidly through confusion, anger, and finally a calculating assessment as he tried to determine exactly what I knew and how to regain control of the situation. "Caroline, this is ridiculous," he said, his tone shifting to one of reasonable concern. "Whatever you think is happening, you've misunderstood. We should discuss this privately, not through lawyers and court filings." I remained seated, my posture deliberately relaxed, despite the tension filling the room. "I think I understand the situation perfectly, Lionel. In fact, I understand it better than you realize." He paced in front of my desk, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now recognized as a tell when he was trying to formulate a convincing lie. "Look, if this is about Jennifer, this isn't just about Jennifer," I interrupted calmly, "though the affair is certainly relevant to our divorce proceedings." His eyes narrowed at my matter-of-fact reference to his mistress. "How did you—" 22 months, I said, watching his face closely. "Weekly meetings at the Archer Hotel, weekend trips disguised as business travel, dinners at restaurants specifically chosen to avoid running into our mutual acquaintances. Did I miss anything important?" Lionel's face paled slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Everyone makes mistakes, Caroline. If you'd given me a chance to explain instead of immediately filing for divorce—" "I'm not interested in explanations," I cut in, my voice level. "I'm interested in facts. Facts like the $175,000 you've systematically diverted from our joint accounts. Facts like the $320,000 in equity loans you've taken against our home without my knowledge. Facts like Horizon Ventures, Lakeside Properties, and NW Development Group, the shell companies you've been funding with marital assets." With each revelation, Lionel's confident facade crumbled further. He sank into the chair across from my desk, his expression now wary, calculating. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Long enough to secure comprehensive documentation of your financial misconduct," I replied. "Long enough to protect my business from your attempts to claim credit for its success or force its sale to Paragon Consulting." At the mention of Paragon, Lionel flinched visibly. This confirmation of his most damaging plan, to sell my company to our largest competitor, sent a surge of cold fury through me, though I maintained my composed exterior. "You've been busy," he said, his tone shifting to something harder, more authentic than the reasonable husband act he'd attempted moments earlier. "So have you," I countered. "Planning our divorce while pretending to support my business. Positioning yourself to claim half of everything I've built. Telling Jennifer how you'd leave me with nothing but debt. Quite the comprehensive strategy." Confusion flickered across his face at the specificity of my knowledge. "How could you possibly know that you and Jennifer were discussing your plans on a recorded line?" I finished for him. "That was careless, Lionel. Almost as careless as underestimating me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by the realization that his carefully constructed plans had completely unraveled. The recorded conversation had been the linchpin in my case, irrefutable evidence of his intentions, his financial deceptions, his complete disregard for our marriage and my contributions. "The business phone line," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "It records all incoming calls." "Yes," I confirmed. including the call where you and Jennifer discussed how you'd strip me of my company, force me to sell our home, and leave me with nothing but debt. Your exact words, I believe." Lionel's expression hardened as he absorbed the full implications of his position. The charming facade, the reasonable tone, the attempts at manipulation, all abandoned now that he understood the depth of what I knew. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice flat. "Now we proceed through the divorce process with full financial disclosure and equitable distribution of actual marital assets," I replied. "The emergency hearing tomorrow will address the funds you've diverted and the fraudulent loan applications. My attorneys will be seeking immediate freezing of all accounts associated with Horizon Ventures and your other shell companies. And the business? Caroline Miller. Consulting remains under my full operational control during proceedings with comprehensive documentation of my role as founder, creative director, and primary client relationship manager. Your contributions will be assessed fairly, but accurately." A muscle twitched in Lionel's jaw as he processed this reality. "You know I'll fight this," he said, his tone now openly hostile. "I have documentation too. Client meetings I've attended, strategic decisions I've influenced. By all means, present your evidence," I interrupted calmly. "And I'll present statements from our executive team, client testimonials, and comprehensive records of who actually developed our methodologies, created our campaigns, and built our client relationships." I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze directly. "But before you decide how aggressively to fight, you should know that the forensic accounting team has only begun their investigation. Every day they dig deeper, they find more evidence of financial misconduct. If you choose to pursue this in court, everything they discover becomes part of the public record. The implication hung between us. Financial fraud wasn't just relevant to divorce proceedings. It potentially crossed into criminal territory. Lionel was smart enough to understand the threat without me stating it explicitly. He stood abruptly, his expression now carefully controlled. "My attorney will contact yours." "I'm sure they will," I replied. "Morgan Reynolds is representing me. I believe she's expecting the call." A flash of genuine surprise crossed his face at the mention of Morgan's name. He had likely planned to retain her himself. Her reputation as the city's most formidable divorce attorney was well established. "You've thought of everything," he said, a note of grudging respect beneath the anger. "Not everything," I corrected him. "Just everything you planned to do." As he turned to leave, I added one final comment. "By the way, we won't be dining at Canlis tonight. I've made other arrangements." The door closed behind him with a definitive click, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I sat alone in my office, feeling neither triumph nor despair, only a profound certainty that I had done what was necessary to protect myself and what I had built. Justice, I reflected, didn't always arrive as a dramatic moment of vindication. Sometimes it came quietly, in the form of careful preparation, strategic action, and the simple refusal to be victimized. Lionel had gambled on my compliance, my ignorance, my willingness to accept whatever terms he dictated. He had lost that gamble completely, and in doing so, he had lost everything. The weeks following that confrontation in my office unfolded with a momentum that surprised even me. The emergency hearing went exactly as Morgan had predicted. Judge Ramsey, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened to the evidence with growing concern, occasionally removing her glasses to stare directly at Lionel's attorney as particularly damning financial records were presented. "These actions represent a clear breach of fiduciary duty," she stated in her ruling. "The court grants the emergency order freezing all accounts identified in the petition, including those held by Horizon Ventures and affiliated entities. Furthermore, the defendant is prohibited from accessing business records or systems belonging to Caroline Miller Consulting pending further hearings." Lionel sat stone-faced throughout the proceedings, his usual charm and confidence notably absent. Beside him, his attorney, a young man from a prestigious firm known for representing high-net-worth clients, looked increasingly uncomfortable as our evidence mounted. They had clearly expected standard divorce proceedings, not a meticulously documented case of systematic financial fraud. Outside the courtroom, Morgan was measured but satisfied. "This is just the beginning," she reminded me. "But it's a strong start. The judge's ruling establishes a foundation for everything that follows." The most surprising development came 3 days later, when Jennifer Harlow abruptly distanced herself from Lionel. Perhaps she had believed his promises of an easy divorce and lucrative settlement. Perhaps she had imagined herself stepping into my life, my home, my social circle, my status, with minimal disruption. Whatever her expectations, the reality of a contentious legal battle with potential financial and reputational consequences apparently held little appeal. Paris, who somehow maintained connections to every gossip network in Seattle, reported that Jennifer had been seen having a tense conversation with Lionel at a downtown coffee shop, after which she left alone, visibly upset. The next day, she withdrew a significant amount from one of the accounts we hadn't yet managed to freeze and booked a flight to San Diego. "Looks like your husband's partner in crime decided to abandon the sinking ship," Paris observed dryly. Felt no satisfaction in Jennifer's departure. She had participated in Lionel's deception, certainly, but she wasn't the one who had vowed to honor and protect me. She wasn't the one who had betrayed the trust of an 8-year marriage. As the divorce proceedings continued, Lionel's position weakened steadily. The forensic accountants uncovered more evidence of financial misconduct than even we had anticipated. His attorney, recognizing the increasingly untenable situation, began pushing for settlement discussions rather than protracted litigation. "He wants to negotiate," Morgan informed me 6 weeks after the initial filing. "His attorney contacted me this morning. They're proposing mediation rather than continuing through the court process." I considered this development carefully. "What's your assessment?" "He's realized he can't win," Morgan replied frankly. "The evidence is too comprehensive, the financial misconduct too well documented. A judge would likely rule even more harshly against him than what we might negotiate in mediation. Plus, settlement keeps the details out of public records, which protects his professional reputation." The mediation process was surprisingly anticlimactic after the drama that had preceded it. Lionel, once so confident in his ability to outmaneuver me, now sat across the conference table looking tired and diminished. The terms we eventually agreed upon were straightforward. I retained full ownership of Caroline Miller Consulting. The house would be sold with proceeds divided according to our respective contributions to its purchase and maintenance. Lionel would repay the diverted funds identified by the forensic accountants, and all connections between our financial lives would be permanently severed. As we concluded the final mediation session, Lionel asked to speak with me privately. Against Morgan's advice, I agreed, curious about what he might say now that our marriage was essentially over. "You outplayed me," he said simply when we were alone. "I never thought you would fight back like this." "That was your mistake," I replied, neither angry nor triumphant, simply stating a fact. "You never really saw me." He nodded slowly, accepting this truth. "For what it's worth, I did love you once." I studied his face, the features I had once known better than my own, now somehow foreign to me. "That's worth very little now, Lionel, but I wish you well." As I walked away, I realized I meant those words. Not because Lionel deserved my good wishes, but because I deserved to release the anger, the hurt, the betrayal that had consumed so much of my energy. I deserved peace. I deserved a future unburdened by the weight of his deception. And now, finally, that future was mine. 1 year after the finalization of my divorce, I stood on the balcony of my new home, a sleek downtown penthouse with views of Elliott Bay that still took my breath away. Even after 6 months of ownership, The evening air carried the scent of salt water and possibility as the sun set over the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. So much had changed in those 12 months. Caroline Miller, consulting, had not only survived the turbulence of my divorce, but had flourished, growing to a team of 35 with offices in Seattle and Portland. The Henderson account, which Lionel had so coveted for our divorce assets, had led to referrals that expanded our client roster by nearly 40%. Paris had been promoted to managing partner, sharing leadership responsibilities while allowing me more time for creative direction and strategic planning. Robert continued to manage our finances with impeccable precision, implementing systems that ensured transparency and security in all our operations. As for Lionel, I heard he had relocated to Chicago shortly after our divorce was finalized. According to mutual acquaintances, he had taken a position with a mid-sized development firm, a step down from his previous role, but still respectable. Jennifer hadn't accompanied him, having apparently decided that a fresh start was preferable to continuing their relationship under less favorable circumstances than originally planned. I didn't waste energy wondering if he'd learned anything from the experience, if he regretted his choices, or recognized the damage he'd caused. His journey was no longer connected to mine. What occupied my thoughts instead was how profoundly the experience had transformed me. The woman who had once avoided conflict at all costs now recognized the value of strategic confrontation. The wife who had trusted too easily now performed due diligence in all her relationships, professional and personal. The business owner, who had undervalued her own contributions, now claimed full credit for her achievements without hesitation or apology. I wasn't bitter. That surprised many people who knew my story. Bitterness would have meant Lionel still had power over my emotional life, and I had no intention of granting him that influence. Instead, I was clear-eyed, determined, and increasingly comfortable in my reclaimed independence. Dating again had been strange at first, but eventually enjoyable. I approached relationships with a healthy skepticism that didn't prevent connection, but ensured I entered partnerships with open eyes and appropriate boundaries. Whether these new relationships would lead to lasting commitment was less important than the fact that I trusted myself to recognize warning signs and honor my own worth. As I sipped my wine, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon, I reflected on the wisdom I'd gained through fire. That sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most profound growth. That standing alone was infinitely preferable to partnership built on lies. That I was more resourceful, more resilient, and more powerful than I had ever imagined. Lionel and his mistress had planned to leave me with nothing. Instead, they had lost everything, while I had gained something invaluable, the unshakable knowledge of my own strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.